Welcome, everyone. My name is Kathy Keeley, and I'm with the Georgia Center for Nonprofits. I'm the Executive Vice President over all the programs. I've actually stopped my video, so I will put it on. I'm going to wave at you. This is me, but I actually live on a farm, and I don't have real internet. So if I leave video on, it's going to slow this whole thing down to a crawl. So joys of living on a farm and not in an urban area. So here's some updated stuff. GCN has a website. It's full of information. There's a couple as board members I want to suggest you look at. One of them, we did an unemployment webinar with Pro Bono Partnership. It is all the current laws in unemployment. We recorded it. It's an hour. With the CARES Act and with legislation by the Georgia legislature, there are some new responsibilities for employers having to do with unemployment. If you have people that have been laid off, if they want unemployment, if they want to collect the extra benefits, like the extra $600 a week, you have to file weekly with the unemployment as the employer. So not only do they have to file, but you also do. So I encourage you to go to that. They answer every question. Scenario planning. So we've been doing a lot of talking about development. I'm going to talk about it. We recorded that. We also recorded a session on financial modeling. We think it's really important from a cash flow as well as a revenue standpoint. Our funding has just gone off a cliff. We are providing free, what we call rapid response consulting. So I was actually just on a consulting call talking about board meetings, and bylaws don't allow for electronic voting. So what do? So we were problem solving. So we're available free for any organization that wants to sign up. It's on our website. Loans, there are two types. I'm going to talk about more of them. Here is the link to the disaster one. For the payroll protection, which I'm going to talk more about, you have to go to your bank directly in order to get that. So the bank, the nonprofit has its checking or business banking list. So, and we're continuing to update regularly. So we did a survey, just so you know, of about 900 nonprofits. So 90% have canceled programs. 50% have done a complete stoppage of all programming. 77% say they have high levels of disruption and that they can no longer provide services. 38% have had their vendors stop serving them, so food delivery, drivers, real stop of volunteers since we can't go out. 80% disrupted in their ability to generate revenue. 35% think they can last less than 3 months. 27% think they can get through. These are people with reserves, 4 to 6 months. So nonprofits are experiencing pretty severe loss and impact as a result of this crisis. Some of the board role during the crisis. So first, communicate and support, appreciate. We think boards probably need to meet more often right now. The 4 to 6 times a year, which was best practice, you may need to meet weekly, monthly, every other week at your own, decide what you need for communication and problem solving and support. Be sure you send notes to staff. They're struggling in all this change, and appreciate what they are doing. Strengthen the partnership with the executive director and the development staff. So you've got to be working closely with the ED. Many of them are going through their own stages of managing this. Somebody compared it to the stages of grief, but the shock, the anger, the working 12 hours a day, 15 hours a day to restructure everything, or the constant worry about where revenue and layoffs are. Development staff, if you should have them in your organization, really important you partner with them. I'm going to talk more later about peer-to-peer fundraising and a campaign we're planning for May 5th. The other thing is that you, the board, that duty of care responsibility, you're going to have to tackle the really hard questions and try and figure out what the future holds here. It's pretty clear we're in a recession. It's pretty clear nonprofits are going to be impacted by government and foundation funding and probably donor fatigue, which I'm going to talk more about. So start now asking hard questions and trying to figure out where the organization's going. Key focus. So here are some questions we think boards should be asking. And by the way, we will send this PowerPoint out. So what absolutely best things can you do now that will protect the long-term mission of the organization? Everybody knows, second, in a crisis, what's the first thing you do? You conserve cash. So your organization should be working to conserve its cash, because this is not like we started in early March thinking, oh, 2 weeks we'll be home. We're in for a long haul here. Explore other funding opportunities. Explore all the loans, all the grants, any new stimulus money coming down. We're going to have to do a patchwork of trying to leverage relationships and get funding for wherever it may be. A lot of boards are very leery about taking on debt, but the disaster money and the payroll protection program are loans. You will have to take on debt, but there are grant options, forgiveness options within them. Please be prepared to make difficult decisions, and you're going to have to make them faster than slower, and this will probably be the hard part. Making changes earlier protects the organization long term. We all need to get to June 30th, but then we need to get to the end of the fiscal year. We need to get through the 18 months, so making decisions early will be important. And then figuring out how you're going to restructure this organization. So depending on what tea leaves or crystal ball you look at, when we get to June 30th, when we reopen, what does that look like? What does a recession look like? What is if it comes back in the fall? Trying to do pretty sound scenario planning for the organization is important. The board engagement, so key questions to ask. Do you need some smaller work groups? So large groups on Zoom are interesting, but smaller work groups may be needed to tackle some of the issues. So can you divvy it up and get some task force going, or 2- and 3-person committees? We are going to have on May 5th a National Giving Tuesday. So the Giving Tuesday people that do the campaign after Thanksgiving are working for May 5th. The board members will be key to this day. Your organization should be asking you to do a peer-to-peer campaign around May 5th. We're going to have a lot of training. We're going to give templates. There is at georgiagives.org. You can look at that. Your organization has an account. It has access to everything it needs to run a mobile virtual campaign. How are you supporting staff? So we have some organizations that are ramping up. They're in the food world. They're in the basic needs kind of areas. They're ramping up. Others have gone the opposite in the arts, environment, other areas. We've gone down to almost zero. People are learning to work virtual. A lot of nonprofits got caught short without the technology they needed. Trying to figure out how to get technology to staff is key if they're going to be productive during this time period. Others have already furloughed. Half of organizations have already laid people off, either a furlough or a layoff. If you've got people unemployed, how are you helping them to make sure they get access to the unemployment insurance? So ways to engage the board. Times of crisis. So it's important that you probably look at your bylaws. Can you vote by electronic meetings? Can you allow for email voting? If your bylaws do not allow it, then I suggest you continue meeting, keep minutes, and when you meet face-to-face again, ratify all the votes and change your bylaws for the long term. Do you have good policies on work from home? Have you updated your policies, checked what they say for layoffs, reduction in force, your sick leave policies, and then your unemployment insurance? Many nonprofits have an option of opting out and being self-insured. What's your status? Did you pay in? If you're self-insured, do you have reserve money? There is some forgiveness for nonprofits on the self-insured side. So again, I encourage you to listen to that. Our webinar, or contact an employment attorney. Make sure that somebody on your staff or your payroll service is filing the weekly unemployment information that is required now under the CARES Act. Communicate to your stakeholders. It's really important you have a key spokesperson and they are messaging out. I have some suggestions about your messaging in a minute. So one of the things I'm finding executive directors don't want to do is emergency succession planning. It's your job as a board. So if I know an agency where the CFO, the COO, and there's another third key senior staff person are all sick with the virus. Who's cross-trained to take over if people get sick? Who can make what bandwidth? And we actually use a chart with 3 columns. Again, different webinar, but there's the function, what's the work, their name a person to do that function, and then cross-training. Have you built that kind of a chart so you have some redundancy, particularly if you're a very small staff? And does the board play a role to make sure payroll happens, to make sure certain banking functions happen? So emergency succession planning. Scenario planning. So this really is about getting through through to June 30th and then end of our fiscal year. Financial modeling, we think the board should be asking, seeing, working on as the finance committee on financial modeling. Our revenues are and will be and continue to be impacted. So building that, we have posted on our website a revenue analysis worksheet, a cash flow worksheet, a budget worksheet, and I'm blocking, there's a 4th one. There are 4 worksheets under financial modeling that are yours if you're on the finance committee or the treasurer and need to do some modeling. So scenario planning is really what we recommend that boards engage in now. And it consists of 4 parts. What are the unknowns? You kind of figure out, all right, all the things we don't know. Then what are our options or scenarios for meeting that? And then what's the best case, worst case? What are a couple scenarios that are our priorities? And then you build an action plan out for 2 scenarios. I worked for Caterpillar in South America for their foundation, setting up some charitable activities for them. And I watched companies change on a dime when there were changes in their economy. They had scenario plans in the drawer, and it really impressed me with taking the time to do scenario plans, put them in the drawer, then a crisis hits, a time of uncertainty hits, you pull them out and you start implementing. They could change a $250 million company in 2 weeks based on their scenario plans. It was impressive, and I became a fan. Here is a kit that we have on our website for scenario planning. And so there's the whole scanning. What are the signs, the what ifs, the knowns, unknowns, brainstorming all your options, pick 2 or 3 priorities, write out the action plan, the budgeting, the financial model, and then you can put it in the drawer until you need action. We need to be thinking about how do we get through to June 30th, and then how do we get through the rest of our fiscal year or the rest of this calendar year if you're on a different fiscal year. So scenario planning can be used for programming. Many of us have faced challenges in programming. GCN is 75% earned income. We earn money through our nonprofit university. It's gone entirely virtual. We're unsure if anybody's going to pay for anything. We're doing scenario planning. Staffing is another area. You may have staff out for a while. Definitely a lot of parents are struggling to homeschool and work. You may have staff where you can only afford fewer staff. How do you redo and plan for less staff? Financial modeling, revenue projections, being really realistic. And then development, we all had wonderful development plans. How are we changing those to reflect the realities of the times? So these were my development wisdoms, and I want to spend some time talking to you about raising money because it's where you as a board. So coming up with scenarios, making hard decisions, keeping it mission focused. Your other pieces, we're in peer-to-peer fundraising. You have a large role to play. And I call it get realistic, get communicating, get creative, and get planning. So let me talk about that. So we know that fundraising and giving, we've got both short-term, immediate, but also a long-term impact. We fully expect donor fatigue by the time we get to October. We know the charitable deduction, we got it changed slightly in the CARES Act. We did not get, which was move it above the line for non-itemizers. Predicting, like, is this going to come back in the fall? What's the summer going to be like? Unknown. How are you going to be impacted and who's impacted? Some of you are spiking. Some of you have gone the opposite way. We do know also that the state has a budget shortfall of $1 billion right now, probably getting worse. Their revenues are way off. We are a balanced budget state. We expect significant cuts there. In the development world, so this is the foundation and corporate world, we're seeing, and we're on conference calls with them almost weekly, they're focusing on emergency needs now of vulnerable populations. There are about 20 response funds that are joint projects of community foundations and United Ways across the entire state. Almost every community that has a community foundation or a United Way has set up a rapid response fund. We have them all posted on our website. If you fit their definitions and criteria, please apply. There is a special arts fund. The Blanken Community Foundation have announced that. The Governor's Council on the Arts will have more funding through the stimulus, through the CARES Act, that'll be released to the states. Remember, particularly in the arts world, there are a lot of independent contractors. They are now eligible for unemployment under the CARES Act. You will be responsible for turning some of that information in. Foundations, so seem to be going three ways. One, they're contributing to these rapid response funds. Two, we need to take care of our existing grantees. We're not going to invest in anybody new. Three, we're worried because our portfolio declined and we're going to be pretty conservative. So we've seen all three in the calls and discussions. They are worried and trying to figure out how best to respond. But if you are not currently funded, this is not a time where you're going to go to new funders and say, hey, this is me, we're wonderful, we do good work, please fund us. It's going to take a while to get new organizations into funders. Corporate, we've seen them organizing volunteers, and we've seen them mostly donating to the United Way Foundation. The corporate folks have been donating to the Central Response Funds for now, and then deliberating on what they're going to do long term. So get realistic. Fundraising goals. So really reviewing your revenue and using that revenue analysis, best, middle, worst case scenarios. Looking at major gifts. So timing of your major gifts. Will you keep that? Are there going to be donor fatigue? Are they going to redirect gifts? If you're planning individual campaigns, you probably can do a spring campaign. You thinking about a fall campaign, please be realistic. People are talking about cutting their fall expectations by 20% because of donor fatigue. Foundations, go to the folks that already fund you. You're going to have a hard time getting in if you've never been funded right now until things calm down. And then corporate sponsorships, a lot of you have events. Try and convert those to grants. Try and get them to work with you on whatever you're planning for fall. So loans is another option on the revenue side. There are two, the disaster loan, which is from the SBA, and the Payroll Protection Program, which is PPP, is from your local bank. I'm going to talk more about those in a second. I cannot stress getting realistic about revenue. Development officers say to me, because I'm doing a lot of connecting with them right now in the rapid response consulting, they're very worried that their goals are too ambitious for this year. They may have been good in February, but right now they need a strong relook and they need the board to adjust their expectations to what's possible. Event planning for the fall. So the general consensus is that we are probably going to have too many events in the fall, and we may encourage donor fatigue. People that canceled events in the spring, some are moving theirs forward. Some are trying to do one big event in the fall. Some are trying to do two events, mini ones. Really think through what you're going to do for the fall and what you can accomplish. If you try and crowd spring and fall events and do two, you may not have the person power, you may not have the money, you may not have the sponsorships. Think through your events and expect the fall to be very crowded with people kind of with whiplash trying to go to two or see too many events or get too many emails with tickets for this and that event. So planning for COVID. The other part, if you're signing any contracts, make sure you have an out for illness or a cancellation clause. A lot of organizations got caught in the early March. The fact that it's a disaster should give you some relief, but if we expect it to come back, Be realistic. I've talked about that. Size of event, the volunteer person power to call it off, what you can actually achieve. The development experts are extremely worried about our fall fundraising campaign. They just think people may get tapped out, have less money, be still in major layoffs, small businesses suffering. We don't know where we're headed, so now is the time to do that. Development, we've suggested they think in these 3 horizons. What are you doing through June 30th? What are you doing till the end of your fiscal year, which varies for a lot of us. Some of it's June, some of it's September, some of it's December. Then really plan out the next 18 months because you're going to have to restart and in a recession that we think is going to last more than a couple of months with what's going on. So let me stop there for a second and take some questions before I get into all this complicated loan stuff. Question?
So Kathy, we had a question
Yes.
on, you had said that you would encourage them to convert corporate sponsorships to grants. So can you talk a little more about what that looks like?
Yeah, I would call my corporate sponsor, particularly if you had to camp the event and you're not sure what you're doing. I would call them and have a conversation and say, here's the things we're doing. Here's how we've had to adjust. Would you consider, and make it at the nice, would you consider converting this to a grant to us? We were forced to cancel the event by the disaster. We are still paying staff. We're still doing this. All the development people, the research is saying you have to point out, here's how we adapted and here's how we're going forward so you look strong for the future. We have heard the corporate and foundation folks say, we don't want to invest somebody that's going under. So you've got to be able to tell them kind of your strategy for immediate, but your longer term strategy. And then would you consider helping us by converting it to a grant would be my pitch. Some are going to say yes and have been saying yes. Some say no. Some will do half of it. Some will convert and say, well, let's put it to the fall, and they'll defer the decision.
Okay, any other questions out there? That's the only one we had in the queue, so we'll double check.
Okay. I will keep going.
Sounds good.
Okay, so there are 2 loans out there. Apparently my slide for disaster, let me talk about the disaster one first. If you lost immediate revenue in March, if you laid off employees in March, you should seriously consider the disaster money. So application is up. It's been up since last Monday. It's been up a whole week. It takes about 2 hours to fill out. It comes with $10,000 within 3 days of the application, which if you're denied is converted to a grant, can also be converted to the PP loan, which is struggling to get off the ground. So you need information. The chief proof is you have to have a liabilities form. You have to list out all your creditors and who you owe money to. The application is very self-explanatory. It requires this liability sheet that you fill out. The SBA will determine the loan amount. You do not ask for $5,000, $10,000, $100,000. They will determine the loan amount and get back to you. So it is direct between you and the SBA. It is available around mid-March when we were declared a state as a disaster. It is the money they use for small businesses and nonprofits during a hurricane, tornado, flood. The disaster money is available to any type of nonprofit, C4, C6, associations, lobbying groups, C9, any nonprofit can apply for it. So I encourage you to look at the rules on that and see if you're eligible. The key there is loss of revenue, immediate layoff of staff. The second one, which is in the CARES Act, is the Payroll Protection Program. If you're listening to the news, there's been lots the last, probably since Friday, about what a mess it is. You apply to your bank where you have a business checking account. You use a bank online application on their website. It is not an SBA application. It is the bank's application. If you have a loan, like a line of credit with a bank, you are going to be first in the queue. They are taking care of their borrowers first, and then folks with a checking account. At this point, they've not been accepting applications from individuals that do not bank with them. So I'm suggesting, and if you are with Wells Fargo, Bank of America, the big guys, Citigroup and Truist are still thinking about whether they're going to do it. Bank of America went up. You've seen the press on them probably. They got billions of dollars of requests. Wells Fargo was up only for the weekend. There for about a day and a half, they shut down because they have reached their loan to asset ratio that they are legally required to keep. So go to your bank and forget calling anybody. Everybody's saying it. Just go to their website. They'll post their information and what they're going to do. The loan amount is 2.5 times your payroll cost. You average out the past 12 months, and there's 7 things you get to include in there. I'll say, like payroll, sick leave pay, vacation pay, your health insurance. You divide by 12, come up with an average, take it times 2.5. That is the loan amount. Most banks have a calculator where you fill in the information. You then, at the end of this, so 8 weeks after you actually get the loan, you can ask to have it converted to a grant or loan forgiveness. If you use the money for payroll, rent, utilities, and interest on a mortgage, during that 8-week time period when you got the loan, you have a good chance of getting it forgiven, and it will be a grant. Should you use it for something else, they will then calculate percentages. Most people are figuring they will get 75 to 80% forgiven, and they will still owe about 20% or 25%. The interest rate has bounced all over from 4% to 0.5%. Yesterday was at 1%. There's still only interim regs, not final regs out, so they still can change it. It is a 2-year loan. You will accrue interest from the date of the loan. You will have no payments for 6 months, and then you will have the rest of the time to pay it off. You have to prove economic loss due to this crisis, and you have to prove that you kept staff on or that you're going to rehire staff for that 8-week time period. The rules are changing daily. I would proceed carefully. I think a lot of boards are thinking, oh, this is perfect, it's made for us. But listen to the news. There are hundreds of thousands of businesses applying for it. Applications keep changing. Some are doing it, some aren't. The rules keep changing. Just go to the bank website and follow the rules of your bank. I think it is hard today to go to a bank you've never banked with and just try and get in on their loans. Okay, any questions on PPP or the disaster loan?
Kathy, we have a question about how do they prove an immediate loss of revenue in March?
So they're going to ask you to provide a revenue sheet of your revenue for the last 12 months and then show revenue for March and probably April. And you would have to show that it went down significantly from last year. So a lot of groups have an event plan for March. They can show last year they made $100,000 at the event in March because they do it every year. This year they show 0. So you may have a ticketed, a festival, you had something you were going to do, or you had grants come in. So a number of folks have had grants that were due April 1st to gear up for summer camps, summer programs. Foundations called them and said, we're not sending it. That's a loss of revenue.
Excellent. And then it looks like, let's see here. Do we include Medicare and Social Security in with the payroll? But I think you covered that. That's going to be part of the calculator that the bank
it's
will
from the
provide.
calculator. So wages paid, yes, you do. If you use a payroll service, I would go to your payroll service and have them prepare. It is what you report on your 941. You will need copies of the 941 to submit as part of this online process.
And then the last
The bank has the right, so the bank has the right to come back to you with questions. They may ask for more verification. They may ask for current year financial statements. They may ask for year to date. They may ask for last year's. They may ask, the 990, you're supposed to be able to provide them. So you have 7 days to respond to keep this moving. with them. So be prepared for them to question certain things. Again, nonprofits are a bit of an anomaly for them. Most of the stuff is structured for small businesses. And for PPP, only C3 and C19s can apply. No C4s, C6s, C9s. Only a C3 and a C19, which is a veterans organization, can apply for this money. Sorry, Emily.
No, that's great. So the last thing was just a reminder, you issued this at the top, but we'll remind everybody here again, this is very fluid. Not only is the SBA changing things as they go, but so are some of the banks. That's evolving rapidly for them as well. So if you have a banker that you are doing business with, the best practice is to go to their site, look for their section on the website, which they're all going to have at this point. And even if it's just a notice to get notified when they implement the application, go ahead and do that, because you might get notified faster via email that way than if they have it up on their website.
And I would add, check their website several times a day. I mean, people were checking it Saturday and Sunday. Those are the only ones that got into Wells Fargo. So, and I have another client that applied on Friday, got an email at midnight that the application was wrong and that they had to resubmit a different application, and they expected to have it done by 4 in the morning. So pay attention to, this is a fluid process.
All right.
Any more?
Good.
Okay. So I think I want to talk about communicating with your donors. It's really important right now to communicate, and I segment into 4 buckets. So you have major donors. Each organization defines them as a $5,000 donor, a $50,000, a $500,000. You all define them differently. They need a personal email and or a call from you about how you're doing, what's going on. For some organizations that have sophisticated major donors, I'm suggesting like once a month an update, email and a call every other time. You need to connect with them. You can do a soft ask. They may ask you, what do you need? Please be prepared to provide an answer. Repeat donors. So we have our retention. They get an email blast with an update on what you're doing and a link to a donate button. These are the folks that have given to you for more than 2 years. They might be moved to give you something depending on your blast and your story. First-time donors, I think they need something different than your repeat donors. They don't know you as well. They're going to need a really compelling story. They're going to need a compelling update. They need to know how you're responding and different ways that they could help you. So maybe you need certain kinds of kits, maybe something other, or levels of money, 25 for this, 50 for this, whatever. First-time donors I would treat different than repeat donors because you have stewardship responsibilities with them. And your new prospects, so if you're building your list, you've had some events, you're hoping to hit people up, I think you hold them till May and do not approach them right now. And think peer-to-peer. So who knows the major donors and the new prospects best? We are going to be moving, particularly with this crisis. Peer-to-peer means I want a friend to ask me, somebody I know, not a stranger from an organization. So communication right now is really key, and that includes your foundations. They are these major donors. Sorry for going back. Foundations should be called. You could be on a call with your development person. It would be really impressive to have board members as part of it. The chair could sign the emails that go out. So it's important. What they're saying, the experts are saying, your communication has to be saying, we can weather this. We're here for the long haul. Here's our vision for the future, but here's our contingency plan. Here's what we're doing now. So what we had to do, how we're making up for lost revenue, how we're going to pay back any loans we secure, any cuts to the budget you're going to make short or long term. They need to hear kind of long-term contingency and then the strategic choices you've made around how to deliver programs and services. What's the impact of this? And then more importantly, what are you doing to be around next year? Donors are extremely worried about investing now in nonprofits that are going to go under. So the sky is falling pitch is not going to work. It has to be more of here's the responded, here's the need, here's what we're doing, here's the long-term plan. So communication, messaging, and actually we're doing a class later today just on messaging, because also people are worried about if they're not in the vulnerable population area of being tone deaf. There is a way to approach your donors if you're an environmental arts organization, whatever others, to communicate this long haul. Right now, social media is it. We are going to do some special classes on social media fundraising. With social media, do a poll, do a virtual event, do a little survey, put out stories, put out short pictures. Please use social media. Update your Georgia Gives page. So GeorgiaGives.org is the Giving Tuesday platform. National Giving Tuesday is having a campaign on May 5th. The whole country is going to be involved. We think they're going to try and make it a big deal. The update your pages now, train your board now for a Giving Tuesday fundraising event. WSB has told us they will be working with us, so we're going to have local publicity. It's 3 weeks away, so all the prep work that we spend months on, you got 3 weeks to do. It is going to be a hybrid of funding and volunteerism for this campaign, according to the national folks. So get board members, and here's the hard part. Board members should have their own landing page on this Georgia Gives site in your organization's account. You should be thinking about, hopefully you love your organization, you should be thinking about a text to give campaign where you text your friends, you email your friends, and drive them to your landing page that is on Georgia Gives, which the platform is Mighty Cause. It's all free so that you can help raise money on that day. People are only going to give peer-to-peer. So stuff going out from the agency is going to go on deaf ears. So we're saying get the board, get the staff, and then get 10 volunteers that will fundraise for you on that day or that week leading up to it. You're going to need more people engaged to help you fundraise than just your development officer, ED, the centralized organization sending out things. Useful, but it's probably not going to raise the money right now. This is going to be much more personal, peer-to-peer. Any questions about that?
Kathy, what about funders who were giving before the crisis and aren't asking now? Should they go ahead and reach out?
Yes, absolutely. If you've had money from a funder before, you should reach out. You should be prepared. So some people are asking for, because they had a grant to deliver after school, schools are closed. There is no after school. Would they convert it to general operating? So some are asking for conversion. Some are just checking in. Here's how we're doing. What are you planning funding? So it's a conversation with listening. Others are saying, do you know your guidelines going forward? We thought you'd have a grant due on June 1st. Are you going to move it? Are you going to keep it? So have some questions prepared. So engage in a dialogue. But absolutely, you should be talking to any current funders, foundations.
All right, let's talk about getting creative.
Okay. Creative. So now is the time to be the most creative you can possibly be. We all canceled events. Most people ask, when they cancel their events, they ask their ticket holder sponsors to convert to a grant. Some went like, would you do 50%? Would you do the whole thing? The key was offering options to people that had purchased in advance for the event. Experts are saying, expect to cancel events through probably now July even, but definitely through June 30th. Really, you've heard me say it, plan carefully for October and November. We think we're going to be slammed with too many events. So virtual event, please try and go virtual. Use Zoom, use Facebook Live, use YouTube Live. Art performances, put up a button, ask for donations. Put up a placard that says, working for tips. Tours, video of services, partner. I got a food organization partnering with the Center for Puppetry Arts to try and do something interesting around gardening. So whatever little videos you could send out that would raise awareness and then structure events around it. Think creative. There are a whole lot of parents trying to survive at home with kids. There are a whole lot of people that live alone. There are people with roommates. Think about all the ways we live and what we're trying to do through June 30th to see what you very creatively can try and get out. There are anything you have that you can repackage. So a number of organizations serving children have repackaged and they're selling online things for kids. There may be some earned revenue or ask for donations to support what you're trying to provide online. So we have our nonprofit university. It's gone entirely online. We have whole new classes like how to supervise people virtual, things we're coming up with in May that we're seeking funding for so we can provide. Get creative. Get planning. So spring campaign. You have one opportunity on May 5th. There's Mother's Day when a lot of organizations have campaigns. Maybe June is the end of your fiscal year. You need a spring campaign tied to something, whatever works for you. Earth Day is coming up in April. I'm sure there's a National French Fry Donut that someday. Figure out creatively what works best for you. If Giving Tuesday is your thing, there will be a massive national effort. It will, again, peer-to-peer, organize it. Start probably in June working on your fall campaign. Expect about a 20% decline in what you normally raise. If you raise more, rah, rah. But the experts are all saying expect about a 20% decline. Plan now, clean your list, create your storyboard. You're going to need an extremely compelling story. You're going to need an extremely compelling picture. You're going to need two sets of statistics. One is the need, gap, and service, and the other is your impact. So start figuring out and organize peer-to-peer groups to fundraise for you. It's going to take a small village to help everybody raise money. So get planning. Now is the time. Scenario planning, action planning, strategy action planning, resiliency planning, restructuring planning. We're calling it a lot of things. Now's the time to really figure out financial modeling and your revenue analysis, your cash flow projections, and a revised budget. That is a finance committee function. The board should be approving something. Peer-to-peer campaign for this year. How are you going to raise money? So putting together your development plan through June 30th and then July 1 through December 31st. Look at your development plan in two chunks. Work with your development committee, executive director, development office, depending on the size of your organization, in order to do that planning. And I think you have to do modeling. Again, we don't know if this is coming back in the fall. Some people say it's going to come back till we have a vaccine. So I think you have to do some flexible planning and a lot of what-if scenarios. So my realistic, get realistic, really get those revenue numbers into a place. No pie in the sky, no fudging, no plug numbers, no happiness, real numbers for a difficult year. Communicate, communicate, communicate with your donors, your funders, your foundations, your corporations. It's really important, and there are ways to do it so you do not appear tone deaf. Be sympathetic, but you've got to be clear about what your needs are and that you're here for the long haul. Creative, virtual anything that you can come up with, and maybe you can get in design in April to release something in May. Just try and be the most creative you can be. And you use social media with your creativity, and then get planning for the rest of the year and what you're going to do in the fall. Being prepared and acting quickly is really important. So here's some recommendations from us. So board training. We think it's really important to do a peer-to-peer training for the board. You can do it around this May 5th. You'd have to do it in about 2 weeks. Board member, our industry has moved very quickly to peer-to-peer, and it's all about social media and technology and generational. But if you need to train the board, it's important to do that now and engage the board on it so that they're comfortable with it. Second, you need a really good story and statistic that you can message out. What's going on now? How did you respond? What's the future look like? Communicate what's happening and what you need. You're going to get a lot of no's. I would not try to introduce myself between now and June 30th to a new funder unless I'm in the vulnerable population world and I'm doing like food crisis emergency stuff. Otherwise, stick with your donors. Start planning for restructuring. So I think it's really important for boards, particularly once we get to May 1st, to start thinking about the long term and what the nonprofit is going to have to do to restructure. In 2008 and 2009, I was hired by a foundation to keep 34 organizations alive. They paid me and gave me free to these organizations. And I learned a lot. And one of the things I learned is that organizations that make decisions early rather than late had a better chance of survival. Using resources that are available, but being pretty realistic, like planning for around really core mission and planning around resiliency. How do you take care of the core of the organization so it can re-blossom and come out and grow when this whole thing is over? So I thank you very much. Really appreciate you as board leaders. We need you desperately now in our nonprofits. And I know it's hard because many of you are in businesses, have your own businesses that are suffering, and you've got your own world, but our nonprofits desperately need your leadership right now. So thank you for stepping up. Thank you for joining us. Questions, anything I can answer? And if your organization needs us, please, as a board member, I did a call yesterday with 3 board members without staff. So if you need that rapid response is available. For the next 2 weeks, we're open to anybody, not just members. We can talk about loans, we can talk about strategy, we can talk about what ifs, and they're confidential conversations. Questions, anything?
One person's asking about training their board on peer-to-peer asks, and are we going to be holding any training? I know that might be something that we cover on the Giving Tuesday webinar that's coming up.
Yeah, we'll do some of it. So what I'm thinking about doing is actually recording about a 10 to 12-minute training on peer-to-peer, and then you could just show it to the board, have a discussion afterwards, and figure out your plan. So that's what I'm thinking about now. Is next week, I will record something, we'll post it, we'll send it out to everybody and say it's available. Use that as your training piece. I'm happy too to, if you have an idea for training, just get a hold of me.
Absolutely. And so another question about rapid response consulting, we sent the link in the chat, but just so that everyone knows, you can access the schedule for rapid response at gcn.org/COVID19, all one string there. And we have recently, if you've been visiting the page daily, like some of us have, you notice that it looks a little different. We're just trying to keep it as clean as possible and get the most recent and most up-to-date stuff at the top to help everybody out. So rapid response is going to be the second item listed there.
So I would encourage you, Mighty Cause, which is the platform for Georgia Gives, Mighty Cause is doing a training on all the bells and whistles of the technology. I believe it is next week. I encourage people to sign up for that. I'm going to do the training this week, I think it is, that's on Georgia Gives and the planning and what you have to do to get organized for it and some of the messaging challenges.
Yep, that'll be April 14th. So that'll be exactly a week
next
from
week.
Today.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions I can answer? I know a lot of board members have called or emailed me about the loans, and I encourage you to be very realistic. They are available. You can convert them to a grant, at least probably 75 or 80% of them. They're highly competitive. There's a lot of controversy. It's kind of a mess. I don't think it's going to be the panacea short term, Long term, they may fix it. So hang in there for the long term, but don't expect something in the next 2 weeks unless you already have a loan from the bank and they're trying to protect their ongoing loan with you. All right, with that, thank you, everyone. Good luck. Stay healthy. Any questions we can ask, please let us know.